A conspiracy is a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. By definition, 9/11 was a conspiracy. I already know what you're thinking. If there was something to this 9/11 conspiracy nonsense, the press would have caught it. Besides, with that many people, somebody would have talked by now. Most Americans have heard of the Manhattan Project, but few know what it was. During World War II, the United States secretly developed the world's first atomic weapon. No one knew we had the bomb until we dropped it on those two Japanese cities. At its peak, the Manhattan Project employed over 138,000 US workers. Yet, the average American didn't know this was going on. Even Truman didn't know about the project for the first 12 days of his presidency. Most people have a hard time understanding how such a big secret could be kept from the masses. Yet, it's documented history, it did happen. The United States did develop the world's first weapon of mass destruction behind the people's back. Let's watch now as the History Channel explains in more detail.
This story is the great tragic epic of the 20th century. If I were going to give it a theme, the theme would be humankind invents the means of its own destruction.
And in order to do so, scientists, engineers, and the Army teamed up in an effort dubbed the Manhattan Project. In the short span of 2 years, they built an industrial complex with sites across the country that would rival the size of the automotive industry. To manufacture fuel for the bomb, they built the 5th largest town in the state of Tennessee that consumed 1/10 of the electrical power generated in the United States. The town of Oak Ridge continued to grow to house an expanding workforce. 75,000 people would ultimately come to live at the site. Groves used creative means to recruit them.
It was hard to get construction workers during the war. His solution was to put out ads saying, "We can't tell you what you'll be doing, but there'll be steak every night on the table."
Once hired, workers were instructed to be evasive about what they were doing.
If anybody asks you what you make in Oak Ridge, you tell them you're making the lights for the lightning bugs, or that you're making the holes for the donuts.
Groves initiated the construction at Hanford on August 27, 1943, with a labor force that had been recruited to the area.
Numbers as high as 60,000 construction workers living in tents out on the Hanford Reservation. So the government went in and bought up 500,000 acres out in the desert of eastern Washington, created this remote construction site, and literally in a matter of months constructed large-scale engineered structures for plutonium production.
But Groves was not content to rely on just 2 approaches, Y-12 and Hanford, to produce the weapons-grade fuel for the bomb. By September 1943, he had begun construction on a 3rd, K-25, a gigantic gaseous diffusion plant at Oak Ridge. In June of 1945, 155 Manhattan Project scientists signed a petition calling for a demonstration of the atomic bomb over an uninhabited area prior to its use against Japan.
General Groves heard about the petition and ordered that it not be circulated at Los Alamos. Then, to undermine the petition, he conducted a poll of atomic scientists. What do you think of a demonstration? To his chagrin, 83% of the people answering the poll said some sort of demonstration was preferable to bombing civilians. So then Groves saw to it that the petition was bottled up at Oak Ridge until after the bombs fell on Japan.
Silence and secrecy. Truman was the vice president to FDR from January the 20th until FDR's death on April 12, 1945. It would be another 12 days until the new president was made aware of the Manhattan Project and the weapon of mass destruction that would soon be available. From the History Channel, we read, "The project was so secret that FDR did not inform his vice president, Truman, that it existed. Due to the secrecy, there was never any public discussion as to whether or not this new weapon of mass destruction should be used on a civilian population. As you noticed, 155 scientists who did know what they were building signed a petition and wanted to debate the issue. But the censorship of the press kept things quiet, and the American public never learned of the existence of the bomb until it was dropped on those two cities.
We had, by that time, totally destroyed their Air Force. We had totally destroyed their Navy, and yet they wouldn't surrender.
On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., the gun model uranium bomb Little Boy dropped from bomb bay doors of the Enola Gay. 43 seconds later, the bomb detonated 1,900 feet above Hiroshima with a force of 12,500 tons of TNT.
I could see little bits of Hiroshima down there, but I couldn't, there was nothing there but black boiling mess. And steam was coming up. There were bubbles, and that's the way that thing looked.
"90% of the city was leveled by the 500-mile-an-hour winds of the blast, which charred victims' skin 2 miles away and incinerated those directly beneath the detonation."
We visited the patients. We visited the railroad platform, which they had lined up all the people who were dying of radiation sickness. Maybe 600 or 800. Nothing to be done. They didn't have anything to work with.
The small boy, I think it was a boy, was bloated, and he couldn't hardly recognize the face at all. They were saying, "Okacha, Okacha, Mizu, Mizu, Mommy, Mommy, water, water." The pitiful, painful cry is something I'll never forget.
The Japanese death toll rose to 130,000 people killed by the blast and ensuing radiation sickness. 3 days later, a second, more powerful plutonium bomb, Fat Man, fell on Nagasaki with similar results. Japan surrendered on August 14, 1945.
From this New York Times article dated August 8, 1945, we read, "The work on the atomic bomb was the best kept secret of the war. For keeping the secret, special praise was given to the newspapers and radio broadcasters of the day. The Manhattan Project simply could not have been kept secret without cooperation from the press. You see, in the minds of the American public, if it isn't here, it simply doesn't exist. And if it is reported here, then it's been investigated by a free press, and it's the truth. The press in the United States is the only industry that's protected by the Constitution. A free press is supposed to be the fourth branch of government, a watchdog, if you will. But as far back as the 1970s, the free press had been infiltrated by the CIA.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to two American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Your administration continues to make the use of video news releases, which are prepackaged news stories sent to television stations, fully aware that some or many of these stations will air them without any disclaimer that they are produced by the government. Does it raise ethical questions about the use of government money to produce stories about the government that wind up being aired with no disclosure that they were produced by the government?
There is a Justice Department opinion that says these pieces are within the law so long as they're based upon facts, not advocacy. This has been a long-standing practice of the federal government to use these types of videos. Ken, I mean, there's a procedure that we're going to follow, and the local stations ought to, if there's a deep concern about that, ought to tell their viewers what they're watching.
Prepackaged news. News reports created by the government, handed to the press, and presented to the viewers as independent journalism.
A lot of people think the big news stories today are the snowstorm that's hitting the Midwest or the looming federal budget cuts. But judging by local news, there's apparently an even bigger story that's sweeping the nation right now. Check it out.
Well, if you filled up your gas tank lately, then you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are on the rise. I know.
That's unbelievable. That's kind of scary. Yeah. I really think, what a coincidence!
For 35 years, this previously classified document was unavailable to public scrutiny. It was declassified in 1997 by the JFK Assassination Records Review Board. Known as Operation Northwoods, the plan was ultimately rejected by President Kennedy. It was a series of proposals that called for various terrorist attacks to be carried out on U.S. civilian populations and military targets. The terrorist attacks would then be blamed on Cuba to rally support for a war. Stop and think about that for just one moment. People within our own government devised secret plans to carry out a terrorist attack on our own people to justify a need for a war. Where was the free press? Why didn't someone talk? It's easy for most Americans to realize that this sort of thing could happen elsewhere, such as Hitler's Germany. Few Americans realize that this could happen here as well. But it's documented history. It did happen. It's just that Kennedy refused to carry it out. Next, we'll turn our attention to the Project for a New American Century. Of the 25 people who signed the organization's Statement of Principles, 10 went on to serve in the Bush administration, including Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld, and Dick Cheney. A year before 9/11, they produced a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses. The document, from start to finish, was all about increasing the military defense budget. While recognizing that the United States was the world's sole remaining superpower after the Cold War, 70 pages went on to explain why they needed more money for defense spending. On page 51 we read, "The process of transforming the federal budget is likely to be a slow one, absent some catalyzing and catastrophic event, like a new Pearl Harbor."
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything.
American 11 crashes at 8:46 a.m.
Correct.
You're over in Chelsea. Did you hear the explosion from your position?
Yes, we did. As a matter of fact, we heard it, and because I was just like standing there pretty much looking out the window, I didn't see what caused it or if there was an impact.
So you have no idea right now?
There's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion.
United 175 crashes at 9:03 a.m.
Jim Stewart is standing by. He's got some official reaction. Jim, good morning. What are you hearing?
Good morning, Bryant. Well, as by happenstance, I was talking to FBI headquarters at the moment this explosion took place. They saw it occur as we saw it occur, the second explosion, rather, and their reaction was the same as everyone else. Number one, they noticed the clear weather there. Number two, they noticed what appeared to be, in their eyes, a deliberate attempt to crash the aircraft into the World Trade Center. Right now, they are trying to determine whether, in fact, it was deliberate. They have no information they can share at the moment, and I get the sense that they're in the same mode.
Sometimes the obvious leads you to a conclusion. We're looking at two crashes 18 minutes apart into an obvious target, a building that has never been hit with a plane before on a clear day. What do the intelligence people there say about that?
The intelligence community for some time has been warning in a steady drumbeat, Bryant, that Osama bin Laden has not been heard from now, frankly, since the beginning of the year, the USS Cole incident, rather, and they've been wondering when and if he will strike again, and they only believed it was a matter of time. And I believe that today that is going to be their first suspicion. But we have no confirmation of that. I must underline, there's no confirmation that this is a terrorist attack, number one, or number two, that it's Osama bin Laden involvement. But I can tell you right now, that is what they are thinking. That is the working premise, and we'll just have to see as the day unfolds what they discover.
Jim, as we sit here at 9:17, does the FBI have any choice but to sit and watch this on television?
14 minutes from 9:03 a.m. when United 175 hits the South Tower until 9:17 a.m., Jim Stewart of CBS News is already telling us Osama bin Laden is the man he believes will be the prime suspect for all of this. It's curious that he could so quickly rule out other suspects, such as homegrown terrorism, or foreign terrorist groups, or other nation-states like Iran, Russia, North Korea, or Iraq. How was Jim Stewart able to so quickly rule out all of these other potential suspects in under 14 minutes? It's worth pointing out, although Jim Stewart was on the phone with FBI headquarters, the FBI never said Osama bin Laden is the prime suspect. Jim Stewart stated his opinion that he thought the FBI would make Osama bin Laden the prime suspect. He's reporting his opinion, not fact. Let's listen carefully once more as Jim Stewart introduces America and the TV viewing public to the name Osama bin Laden.
People there say about that?
The intelligence community for some time has been warning in a steady drumbeat, Bryant, that Osama bin Laden has not been heard from now, frankly, since the beginning of the year, the USS Cole incident, rather, and they've been wondering when and if he will strike again, and they only believed it was a matter of time. And I believe that today that is going to be their first suspicion. But we have no confirmation of that. I must underline, there's no confirmation that this is a terrorist attack, number one, or number two, that it's Osama bin Laden involvement. But I can tell you right now, that is what they are thinking. That is the working premise, and we'll just have to see as the day unfolds what they discover.
Oddly, NBC's Andrea Mitchell just also happened to know that Osama bin Laden must be the guy behind these attacks.
But this clearly, according to the U.S. government, is a terror attack, as you heard the president say. Now, one of the things, Matt and Katie, we should understand is that there was no specific threat that the U.S. government is aware of. No specific terror alert other than the worldwide caution that had been reissued in recent days because of the strife in the Middle East, because of concerns over terrorists. Of course, the best known is Osama bin Laden, but no alert coming from his organization. And as far as they know, as of this morning, as of this minute, he is in Afghanistan.
But as we should mention, Andrea,
at 9:40 a.m., ABC's Peter Jennings did report that the DFLP, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, did claim responsibility for the attacks.
There has been a claim of responsibility, according to the Reuters news agency, made to Abu Dhabi television in the Persian Gulf from something called the Palestinian DFLP. The Palestinian DFLP is something called the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
By 10:09 a.m., terrorism expert Kyle Olson was on ABC to explain that he believed DFLP was an unlikely suspect, while mentioning the name Osama bin Laden.
One of those people who makes his living analyzing terrorism. Kyle Olson, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
I wonder if on a day like this anybody wants to be thought of as an expert on terrorism. Be that as it may, and assuming that, and knowing that much of the country is shocked at the apparent breadth of this, are you?
Well, this is the kind of attack that has fallen more into Tom Clancy novels than into actual response planning. Having said that, we've been anticipating for a long time. We've wondered why it's been so relatively quiet. The suggestions of Osama bin Laden's involvement. What has he been doing since Cole? Other groups out there with a real or imagined grudge against the United States. The nature of the event is shocking. The fact that it's happened is not.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Really appreciate it. Kyle Olson.
Yeah, one quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
One quick thing. The suggestions that are floating around out there right now. There's apparently this claim from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Right.
Very interesting to know. If this is legitimate, if this claim stands up, this appears to be the first time this group has targeted Americans. This group has primarily steered away from the more extreme end of the violence scale. They focused less on suicide bombings, more on gun attacks and that sort of thing in the territories against Israelis.
Well,
if this holds up, this is a very different tactic.
By 10:29 a.m., ABC News reported that a senior official for the DFLP denied responsibility for the attacks.
Now we've from the Middle East, a senior official from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine has denied any involvement, any connection to a double plane crash on the World Trade Center.
It seems odd that the press somehow knew to continue talking about Osama bin Laden while ignoring the DFLP. From this National Geographic interview, the former president claims he wasn't made aware that Osama bin Laden's terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda, was a suspect until after 2 o'clock that afternoon.
The decision was made to go to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska by the military and the Secret Service because they figured this was the safest place for me to be. Very secure bunker there. There's a lot of communications there. When we landed it in Nebraska, we got hustled off to the secure bunkers. But they had a conference room in it, and I had assembled my national security team via the video conferencing tools at Offutt. And I got a report for how each department was responding to the crises. My question was who did it. The head of the CIA, George Tenet, believed it was Al-Qaeda. It had the earmarks of an Al-Qaeda attack. But Tenet wasn't that definitive yet. So my first indication it could be Al-Qaeda was during the national security meeting at Offutt Air Force Base.
It would be interesting to know what exactly are the earmarks of an Al-Qaeda terrorist attack versus other forms of terrorist attacks. Regardless, Jim Stewart and other reporters and experts on TV that morning knew to start dropping the name Osama bin Laden as early as 9:17 a.m.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks
It looks like the work of Osama
We don't
bin
know
Laden.
that this is Osama bin Laden.
It's Osama bin Laden's training
From
camps
Kabul,
in
Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden's people and
Bin Laden has not been heard from now.
Of Osama bin Laden's involvement.
against Osama bin
Laden's terrorist network.
In the days immediately following 9/11, Osama bin Laden did deny on 4 separate occasions that he had anything to do with the attacks. Unlike the denial from the senior official at the DFLP, this had very little effect on the press.
Osama bin Laden, number 1 on everybody's most wanted list in the world today, is saying that once again that he did not do it. Don't hold him responsible. He's not guilty. He, of course, is the man that has been fingered by just about everybody in the world. And now he's released a statement really underlining that he had nothing to do with it. So let's go through the statement. There's some interesting aspects to this. He said, after the recent attacks which the U.S. has witnessed, the U.S. government ventured to point fingers at me, accuse me of involvement. The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it, that is the United States. And it goes on. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seems to have been planned by people for personal reasons. And as for me, I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations. Well, Jack, we can all weigh that on the scale of credibility and come to our own conclusion.
I already know what you're thinking, the Osama bin Laden confession tape. What few Americans realize is that the source for that tape was the Department of Defense. They claim to have found the tape in a house in Jalalabad. As noted in this BBC article, the tape is of very poor audio and video quality. It does seem odd that bin Laden would say he didn't do it repeatedly and then say he did do it in a confession tape. Immediately, conspiracy theories were born in the Arab world. As you can see from this BBC article, many Arabs believe the tape is fake.
The FBI's 10 Most Wanted poster reads, quote, Osama bin Laden is wanted in connection with the August 7, 1998 bombings of the United States embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. These attacks killed over 200 people. In addition, bin Laden is a suspect in other terrorist attacks throughout the world. It turns out, though, bin Laden has never been indicted for 9/11. And there's not a single mention of it directly in the FBI poster. Sheila Thorne in the FBI's New Orleans office told us, quote, the indictment could be superseded if necessary. In other words, 9/11 charges could be tacked on later for something many describe as the Pearl Harbor of our generation. As for why there is no mention at all of 9/11 in the FBI's 10 Most Wanted poster of Osama bin Laden, we wanted to get a comment from the White House as well. When we talked to a gentleman by the name of Blair Jones at the White House press office, he told us that we need to go back to justice, in other words, the FBI. We told him we wanted a separate comment, and he said, quote, we speak with one voice.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Just 9 days after 9/11, the president addressed a joint session of Congress where he blamed al-Qaeda, even mentioning its leader Osama bin Laden by name. Then came December 13, 2001, when the Pentagon released bin Laden's so-called confession video. The FBI revised bin Laden's poster 2 months after September 11th, and 5 years later, there's still no 9/11 reference.
As you can see from the FBI's Most Wanted poster for Osama bin Laden, he has been indicted for the bombing of 2 U.S. embassies in 1998. There is no mention of September 11th because Osama bin Laden has never been indicted for September 11th. An indictment doesn't mean that someone has been tried and found guilty. An indictment is issued when a federal grand jury, consisting of 16 to 23 jurors, hears evidence presented by the U.S. prosecuting attorney with no representation from the defense. If the majority of jurors determines that there is enough evidence indicating a crime probably was committed, then they issue an indictment and the matter can go to trial. Independent researchers did contact the FBI to ask for an explanation regarding the lack of 9/11 on Osama bin Laden's Most Wanted page. The reason why 9/11 is not mentioned on Osama bin Laden's Most Wanted page is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. It begs the question, why isn't the bin Laden confession tape hard evidence? If the bin Laden confession tape was in fact fake, who would be willing to put it before a federal grand jury and risk perjury. Regardless, there is reason to believe that the Secretary of Defense did lie about Osama bin Laden.
The search for Osama bin Laden, there was constant discussion about him hiding out in caves, and I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of the side of a mountain.
Oh, no.
This is it. This is a fortress.
Yes.
A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see. Secret exits on the side and on the bottom. Cut deep to avoid thermal detection. A ventilation system to allow people to breathe and to carry on. The entrance is large enough to drive trucks and even tanks, even computer systems and telephone systems. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
For days, the Americans bombed the mountains at Tora Bora with the most powerful weapons they had. The Northern Alliance had been paid more than $1 million for their help and information. And now, their fighters set off up the mountains to storm bin Laden's fortress and bring back the Al-Qaeda terrorists and their leader. But all they found were a few small caves, which were either empty or had been used to store ammunition. There was no underground bunker system, no secret tunnels. The fortress didn't exist.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
Well, Jack, we can all weigh that on the scale of credibility and come to our own conclusion.